Hi and welcome back to another podcast with Stack Econ Bits. Today we'll discuss inflation, but first let's start with introducing ourselves. My name is Natalie and I'm a junior with a major in finance and minor in economics.
My name is Amanda and I'm also a junior majoring in finance with minors in economics and international business.
And I'm Eliana, and I'm a sophomore majoring in math with a concentration in actuarial science and a minor in economics.
Like I mentioned before, we'll talk about inflation today as a part of our macroeconomics workshop. Amanda, why don't you tell us what inflation is?
Sure. Inflation measures how much more expensive a set of goods and services has become over a certain period, usually a year. Inflation cannot be measured by an increase in the cost of one product or service or even several products or services. Rather, inflation is a general increase in the overall price level of the goods and services in the economy. Eliana, could you tell us more about the cause of inflation?
Of course, inflation can be caused by various factors such as increased demand for goods and services, rising production costs, expansionary monetary policies increasing the money supply, or supply chain disruptions. Moderate inflation is often considered normal and can be beneficial for economic growth as it encourages spending and investment. However, high or hyperinflation can have detrimental effects on an economy, such as eroding savings, reducing consumer purchasing power, and destabilizing financial markets. Central banks and governments typically aim to maintain low and stable inflation rates through monetary and fiscal policies.
I think it's important to realize that the primary impact of inflation is decreasing purchasing power, which means that the same amount of money can buy us less in the future than it is today. Though individuals may receive the cost of living adjustments to wages they take home, they more commonly see the consequences in the groceries they buy, the rent they pay, and other transactions they make. So basic necessities such as food, housing, transportation, and healthcare becomes more expensive. This can stain households' budgets, especially for those with fixed incomes and limited financial resources. Another way this affects an everyday person is inflation can affect the cost of borrowing money. Borrowers may benefit from inflation because they can repay loans with money that is worth less than when they borrowed it. Lenders may adjust interest rates to compensate for the inflation, making borrowing more expensive because interest rates on the loans would increase. Amanda, can you explain the different types of inflation?
Yes, the two most common measurements of inflation are Consumer Price Index, PCI, and Personal Consumption Expenditure Price Index, PCE. Although they are all a measurement of inflation, they have very different focus, coverage, and methodologies. PCI measures the average change over time in the prices paid by urban consumers for a basket of goods and services. It reflects the spending patterns of urban consumers and is widely used as a measure of inflation for the general population. CPI includes a broad range of consumer goods and services such as food, housing, transportation, and medical care. Eliana, why don't you explain PCA?
Yeah, sure. PCE measures the changes in prices paid by households for goods and services they purchase, regardless of whether those goods and services are produced domestically or abroad. It includes both consumer spending on goods and services and the inputted expenditures for certain services provided by the household, such as owner-occupied housing. The Federal Reserve uses PCE as its preferred measure of inflation when formulating monetary policy.
The strength of CPI is that it's a consistent measurement that takes into account food, energy, and commodities, such as clothing, vehicle purchases, and services such as medical care. Each of these sections of CPI are broken into more specific areas, and each of these areas are weighted and averaged out to get the overall CPI. The CPI is very good at including a wide range of products that consumers use.
PCE does not include food or energy as a way of reducing price range volatility, which is supposed to be a much more stable indicator compared to the CPI. Many of the regional Federal Reserve banks also track additional iterations of the standard measures of inflation. For example, the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland calculates and tracks the median CPI, which aims to help the consumer better understand the overall price changes, as it excludes the prices that have changed the most as a way to take out the noise in the data. It is very important to use these indicators as a whole to understand inflation. But both of these measurements have weaknesses too, right, Eliana?
Yes, every indicator includes the price changes in nearly all goods, but does not take into account the quality of each good. However, CPI only measures price changes for urban consumers, whereas PCE covers all households. Although the urban population makes up the overall majority of the U.S. population, people living in urban areas have very different consumption patterns than people living in suburban and rural areas. Not including these groups can change the overall CPI significantly, either in a positive or negative way. PCE, not including food and energy, could be misleading on the true level of inflation. Now, we can look at inflation in today's world.
Okay, so I found that in today's economy, the Fed has a target of inflation at 2%. Presently, CPI is at 3.1. Clearly, we're still above the 2% target. And recently, however, analysts have become fearful that inflation is cooling too slowly, which should impact the Fed's decision to make interest cuts. Tomorrow, new data regarding the inflation rate will be posted, which might help to clarify the future picture and what decision could potentially be made.
When looking at changes in inflation, the percent increase from last year in terms of inflation was lower in the month of January than it was in December. However, changes on a monthly basis are increasing at a higher rate than expected. This is also generating skepticism regarding the decrease in inflation rates and hurts the economy's ability to reach the target rate in a timely manner.
In terms of indicators, both the CPI and Producer Price Index, or PPI, which discusses the cost of manufacturing goods, were higher than expected last month. This being said, the PCE is also expected to be higher. This could encourage the Fed to keep the rates steady and not lower them, prolonging the amount of time until the next cut. Michelle Bowman, the governor of the Fed, also said that they haven't ruled out raising rates if progress begins to stall, but many analysts believe that this is not extremely likely.
Wow, that's really interesting. Does anyone have anything they would like to add?
No, I think we covered it all.
I agree.
Okay then, thank you all for listening to our podcast about inflation.
Bye.
It's showtime.